Hokie Hangover live on YouTube, youtube.com/@Hokie Hangover podcast. We recorded about a week ago, Ricky, and we said we'll be back soon. We're not sure when. And now Virginia Tech is looking for their second coordinator of the offseason. But before we get into that, Andrew's not with us at the moment. He said he may join. He's at a work conference and arguably one of the nicest resorts on the East Coast, the Omni Resort in Amelia Island, Florida. For my money, out of the ones I've been to, I'd put that one up against anybody. So he's having a very nice time.
It's like 10 minutes from my grandma's house.
Really?
Yeah, my grandma lives in Fernandina Beach.
Oh, okay. Yeah, very close by. Nice area down there.
Honestly,
nice.
Sounds like an excuse. You have to be dedicated to the pod at all times. And as soon as this news dropped, which was I can't remember what time of the day. I think it was in the morning.
3-ish.
Or no, it was in the afternoon.
3-ish this afternoon.
Yeah. Today's been a mess. Anyway, when this dropped, I immediately texted our group chat with producer Scott from the Basketball Conference podcast and Joey Weaver, also from the same show, saying, "Emergency pod. This is this has to happen tonight." So Mike mentioned it. Tyler Bowen is out the door. He is gone. Bags are packed. He could not leave Blacksburg fast enough, I'm sure. So let's cover the facts here first.
Yep.
We don't know, at least I haven't seen a confirmed financial figure for Bowen. However, a good tweet here from Andy Bitter from Tech Sideline gives some context for this situation and really helps cement why this makes a ton of sense for Tyler Bowen. He'd be an idiot to not take this job. Justin Fry, who is the former offensive line coach at Ohio State and is now the offensive line coach for the Las Vegas Raiders, made $1 million last year at Ohio State as a position coach.
Yeah.
According to Bitter, Tyler Bowen last year as Virginia Tech's offensive coordinator made $875,000.
Mm-hmm.
So the chances are that Bowen probably got the same number, if not a slightly more, given inflation, to go ahead and be a position coach at the national champion program, the Ohio State Buckeyes, rather than call plays at Virginia Tech for less money. So we're both in agreement, right, that this is a move for Tyler Bowen to make this jump.
Yeah, you and I went back and forth, disagreed a good bit on the Seth Kiss podcast last week. I think you and I are going to be in lockstep tonight on a lot of stuff. So let's start with this. I mean, you mentioned the fact of the matter is that this is likely a pay raise for Tyler Bowen, right? The other thing that kind of goes without saying, but I'll go ahead and just put it in black and white here. There is more job stability at Ohio State under Ryan Day than there is for Brent Pry at Virginia Tech.
Why is that, Mike?
That would be because, as you so aptly mentioned, they are the defending national champions as of a couple weeks back.
And Virginia Tech is
not trying to make bowl games. Scraping by to make bowl games. This is a no-brainer for Tyler Bowen, right? And I think there are a few different angles here, and I have a lot of thoughts in my head about everything. They're just, when this dropped, I was like, wow, I can't believe Tyler Bowen is going to Ohio State, was the initial reaction. Not because it's not a no-brainer for him. It is, like we already laid out, but it's more of just, I can't believe he's actually leaving for Ohio State. That is just like a shocking news drop. Like, I couldn't believe that was happening.
Yeah. Well, and so the timing of this is extremely interesting. Virginia Tech just finished a search that took, I don't know, Mike, 10 years for their defensive coordinator job, for Virginia Tech to finally settle on Sam Sifkas. So we're at the point now in the cycle where we just had the traditional National Signing Day today.
Right. Yep.
So this is extremely late in the cycle for moves to be made.
Yeah.
And now Virginia Tech is in a position where just 2 days ago, Brent Pry was telling local beat writers in his office that Tyler Bowen's going to have a different role this year. He's going to be a walk around coordinator, whatever the hell that means. And less than 48 hours, he's gone.
Yeah.
So I don't know how quickly this came about. Obviously, Chip Kelly's move, which I texted you guys about a few days ago, and you all ignored me, you bastards.
Just a smidge busy this weekend, just a little busy.
Anyway, Chip Kelly leaving was relatively recent, and
Yeah.
I don't think any of us honestly expected Tyler Bowen to be a name that popped up in their coaching search for anything. And I'm actually kind of interested to see what the reaction is over in Columbus from their fan base as to how they view this hire, because I know how a lot of folks in Blacksburg view this hire from the Ohio State perspective. I'd be curious to see what they think of it.
Yeah, me too. Interesting too, because they lose both coordinators this offseason, and they just internally promoted this afternoon, like after this Tyler Bowen news broke, they just internally promoted Brian Hartline offensive coordinator. Now, that wasn't as shocking of a move. He was getting co-OC, assistant to the head coach, like those types of responsibilities. He's been in some group of 5 coaching searches. His name has been on the market for a while. I remember him playing at Ohio State, and he was an unbelievable receiver. So I feel really old seeing him come up through the ranks.
Legend.
Miami Dolphins legend, Brian Hartline. So, yeah, I mean, they internally hire their OC. I'm not quite sure how they feel about that. They lose their defensive coordinator to Penn State, which I know there's some stuff going on behind the scenes there. And then they bring Bowen in, which is kind of a weird one from Ohio State's standpoint. I mean, Bowen has good experience in terms of he was a P4 offensive coordinator. He's coached in the NFL as a tight ends coach. Obviously, he was an assistant at Penn State. But I don't really get it from Ohio State's standpoint. I think they could have aimed a little bit higher here. And I like Tyler Bowen. Like, I know the fan base can't stand him for reasons, but like, I like Bowen. I do think he's still pretty young. He has a pretty bright future. I just don't really understand the offensive line coach fit there at all. That's not really Virginia Tech's problem. Virginia Tech's problem is they don't have an offensive coordinator now. We are weeks away from spring practice. Like you mentioned, Ricky, this is a strange time in the coaching carousel. And I tweeted this earlier, but this is the second time this has happened under Brent Pry, right? Where a coach has left for a lateral move in title at best, right? Or I guess in Bowen's case, for title only, it would be a demotion, obviously, going from a coordinator to an offensive line coach. But it's a promotion in money, we think, for Bowen. It's pointing that direction. I'd put it greater than 85, 90%. I don't think he's leaving for Ohio State for a significant pay cut. I would say that, even with the stability of the program aside, like, you're making too much money. Your buyout is too good. Like, it does benefit you to some degree to get fired, right? And getting that windfall. So I think he's going to leave for a pay raise, right, at Ohio State. But this is the second time that this has happened to Virginia Tech under Brent Pry. You lose Joe Rudolph to Notre Dame, which, again, lateral move in title, but you're going to a better, more well-positioned program, better positioned program at Notre Dame. And then you have this situation now with Bowen where you're going to Ohio State, again, stable national title contender and winner this year, obviously, and for a pay raise, a no-brainer for Bowen. For Virginia Tech, I don't know what you do here. Like, this is a weird time in the cycle, but in addition to that, you just took a really long time to hire your defensive coordinator. Some of that had to do with the fact that you were talking to people who were in the college football playoff and advancing pretty far into the playoff, right? So that was part of the hang up. But
Potentially
then,
someone on the Ohio State staff.
right, ironically, you could have pulled off a coach swap here. Uh, Inadvertently pulled off a coach swap. That would have been really funny if Ryan Day's like, you know what, I'm just going to take your offensive coordinator then. That's fine, no problem. But it didn't quite work out that way. But we know that Sam Sefkis was not the first choice for Virginia Tech. That was apparent, or else the search wouldn't have gone on as long as it did. But Virginia Tech settles on Sefkis, which we'll see how that works out. And for offensive coordinator now, you could go almost any direction with this. I think that the incoming guy is probably going to be more along the lines of a Sefkis and less along the lines of like an established OC, like somebody we've seen around the block before. I would be really surprised if an established offensive coordinator at a program worth a damn is going to make the jump to Blacksburg, where they have a first-year defensive coordinator, a fourth-year head coach who has struggled in his time in his first head coaching job, and see this as an attractive opportunity in Blacksburg. I think this is going to be either a outside hire that's a little bit under the radar like Sefkis, or it could be an internal hire, which truthfully, Ricky, given the timing of things, that wouldn't shock me. But I don't know. This could work out for Virginia Tech, right? Like, I know people have varying opinions on Bowen, and that is totally fine. But I think this is a net negative for Virginia Tech right now, given the state of the coaching cycle, given where this program is right now in terms of like lack of stability and an uncertain future with their head coach. I don't know how you're going to do better than Bowen here just because of time in the cycle. That doesn't mean he can't. And we'll see about the hire, and it'll, we won't know, right? It's the same thing we were saying last week with the Sefkis thing. You and I disagreed, but the bottom line was you and I were in agreement on this. We won't know until we see the product on the field. We just simply won't know.
Yeah.
And it's going to be the same thing with OC here. And Pry's got to nail it. And it's a really hard spot for him to be in, but he's got to nail it, Ricky, because like that's the reality. If these coordinators don't work out, he's out the door anyway.
So, as I'm fond of saying, let's unpack this because there's a lot of angles I want to talk about here on the show. First, one of my chief criticisms of the decision to fire Marv and then eventually hiring Sam Sefkis was I didn't feel like you were making a big enough upgrade. And I felt like if you're going to make a change, you shouldn't make a change for change's sake. And I know that you didn't agree with that characterization, but that was how I viewed it.
Yep.
My worry now for the offensive coordinator position is that Virginia Tech is being forced to make a change for change's sake, in that they're not going to be able to get someone in this position that is more than, at best, marginally better and more qualified than Tyler Bowen. For all the reasons you mentioned, there is no incentive outside of maybe a giant financial raise for any sitting coordinator to make a move at this point in the calendar to go towards a program that may be missing its head coach next year. So there really isn't a reason for any of those people to listen to Brent Pry when he picks up the phone.
Yeah.
So for all of those reasons, Mike, I think you're spot on in the sense of Virginia Tech is going to have to get a little outside the box here in order to fill that spot. And I have two ideas, one of which I've seen mentioned already on X, and then one that my buddy Stephen Newman mentioned to me earlier today, which I think is something that folks may need to prepare themselves for. Before we get to potential candidates, I wanted to talk about your point that you made on X today about what it says about the Virginia Tech program that you have a coordinator level position being vacated willingly to go be an assistant coach elsewhere.
Yeah.
And what that means for not just the optics, but what that means for the reality of how people view the program externally, both from an observer perspective and a fan perspective, but also a coach assistant level perspective.
Yeah. So, um, a few things can be true at once, right? Like you say all the time. Like a few things can be true at once here. Number one, this is a no-brainer for Bowen. We've got stability, money, got that covered. Anybody on the staff, if they got that opportunity, should take it, right?
And before you finish that point, I want to throw up one of our comments we got here from friend of the show, Grayson Wimbush. He
Dude
says,
jumped off. Yeah, go ahead. You got it. Yep.
Dude jumped off a sinking ship, took the pressure off himself in demotion out of blue blood, and got a pay raise. Tebow made out like a bandit, but he pulled a Jack Sparrow level maneuver.
Yep.
That's
right.
A fine analogy, Grayson.
Right.
Glad to see that you're listening to the show tonight.
Right on the money. Thank you for your support as always. So there's that part of it. But then from Virginia Tech standpoint, you got to look in the mirror, right? You got to look in the mirror and you got to say, what are you right now in the college football landscape? This is the second time that this has happened to you where a coach has left for a blue blood. And before you tell me that Ohio State and Notre Dame are better programs, I agree with you. I've said as much already tonight. But Virginia Tech is not viewed the same way as they were 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? They're just not. This is not.
Hell, even 7 years ago, probably.
And we have talked about how this has become less of a national brand and more of a regional brand. We've said that on this podcast, and that's a bad thing in this college football landscape. It's a stepping stone job. I hate to say it. That's what this program is right now. I'm not saying it can't be what it once was ever again, but we're trending that direction very, very quickly. The results speak for themselves in terms of Virginia Tech's lack of success in the last 15 years relative to what they were under Frank Beamer in the early mid 2000s, right? When Virginia Tech, I'm talking like post title appearance, right? Post 99 national title appearance, like the program's rolling 10 wins a year. You know, you can count on it, right? Just sun goes up, sun goes down, Tech wins 10 games a year. And it hasn't been that way for a very long time. This is a stepping stone job. Like, the coaches clearly view it that way. You have assistants jumping ship for better situations. Pry is a lame duck head coach. If it doesn't happen this year, it could happen a year from now, right? In terms of like post 2026 season. This is just not. There are programs in college football right now that are very serious about this NIL revenue sharing era, the revenue sharing that we're about to enter into this spring in all likelihood. There are programs that are very, very serious about it. And they're all the ones you would expect. It's the 10 or 15 schools that are recruiting and paying players and paying for coaching staffs and trying to retain talent in a way that puts them in position to win national titles. Virginia Tech is not doing that and has not done that, right? They just haven't. I'm talking pre-NIL, Virginia Tech was not doing that. When Virginia Tech was at its best, they weren't setting themselves up for success in the future. They did not capitalize on the success they were having under Beamer. We talked about it all the time. Like, They were falling behind in facilities. They were falling behind on the recruiting staff. All that stuff came home to roost post Beamer with Fuente. And it's kind of gone downhill ever since. Like, Pry has tried to fix some of the recruiting stuff. They've tried to expand the staff. It's really hard to kind of put that sand back in the bottle, so to speak. That was a wrong analogy, but it was just like really hard to kind of get yourself back into position, right? And
you missed out on the potential compound interest of what you could have had you invested early on under really Michael in his and what he did for the 2 year. I mean, I think that was really your window of opportunity.
Yeah, and I just think that this is a program that has fallen off significantly, and I don't think I'm breaking new ground here with you or anybody listening. I think people listen to our show and kind of understand where we're coming from. We're realists with the situation. This is not smoke and mirrors. This program is not in a good spot right now, and it was recruiting under Fuente, and they had some on-field success early in the tenure, and then that flamed out. Then Pry comes in and says, I'm going to fix recruiting, but the on-field product hasn't kind of followed, right? And last year was the best roster he's had, and the season went worse than the year before. And I know they had a bunch of injuries, but like the offensive line's been bad for 3 years. I just don't. This is a circle. Like Virginia Tech is stuck in a rut right now. It's a circle. It's hire a coach, hope he has a good year or two, hope he parlays that into recruiting, and it just hasn't happened. Like Fuente had a couple good years, flamed out. Hire Pry to fix what Fuente was doing. Feels like you're getting, making some progress. Get into year 3, the first year you actually have expectations, you fall flat on your face. Then you're losing important players to the portal, and your recruiting is fine. It's better than it was under Fuente, but now you're losing key members of your coaching staff at inopportune times. It takes you forever to, you had to fire a defensive coordinator. You had to fire an offensive line coach going into pivotal year 4. Now you lose your offensive coordinator on a whim. This hire means a lot coming up here. And we'll talk about candidates now, Ricky. This hire means a lot to Brent Pry, and he's in a really, really tough spot here. I do want to acknowledge that. Like, Tech's going to hire somebody. We'll come on here and we'll talk about it, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of it. But this is tougher than the defensive coordinator hire, Ricky, in my opinion, because you didn't make the decision to fire Tyler Bowen. You were expecting him to be here, right? This had to have caught Pry and his staff totally off guard. And that's not a good place to be. At least with Marv, you made the decision to let him go. You made the decision to start the coaching search, not the other way around. Now you have a coach out the door in a really inopportune time. Spring practice coming up. You have a bunch of young guys on the offense next year that have to learn a new system, which could work out okay, right? Because it's going to be new to everybody. But you have a veteran quarterback coming back in Kyron Drones, who's now going to be learning an entirely new offense. This is not a great situation for Virginia Tech, and I don't know how Pry proceeds. They're going to hire somebody and hope it works out, but man, he's gonna earn his paycheck on this one, Rick. I don't know what you do here.
Yeah, you're not kidding. We've got a ton of comments, and I want to bring some of them in, even though one of them is going to trigger some folks here. Hokie Law Dog.
No ideas are bad ideas.
I appreciate the troll job here. They're going to bring back Fu as OC, and then Andrew Fu as OC would be better than Bowen. Honestly, I may not disagree with you on that.
I agree. I would agree. Yeah, I would agree with that.
So let's do the internal option or options first. 540 Hokie, promote Mines and see what he can do. This is going to be the name that's going to be brought up the most in terms of internal options.
Yeah.
You figure Elijah Brooks has, I think, been fine as running backs coach, and seems like he can recruit and is doing a fine job. Quite honestly, I don't think him and Fontel Mines are that far apart in terms of performance, both on the field and on the recruiting trail. But it seems like Fontel Mines is the one that gets the most praise for what he's done, specifically as a recruiter. Yes,
money too.
Also. So, Mike, I know you mentioned that given the timeline here, the internal route may be I don't know. You didn't say most likely, but do you think that it could be?
No, I don't think most likely, but I think it'll be on the table more than the defensive hire
otherwise would have been. Yeah,
yeah. Virginia Tech, I think, was only going to go internal on the defensive coordinator hire if it was a really dire situation. I think we were closer to that point than most people probably think that we were. But yeah, this is much more likely than the defensive coordinator hire to be internal. I don't think it's the most likely of all the scenarios. I still think it's probably going to be an outside hire, but I think it's on the table. So
breaking news. Before we jump into potential candidates for this job, Mr. Andrew Alix has joined the show from Amelia Island, Florida, the absolute, maybe one of the most beautiful parts of the state, probably.
Yes.
Andrew, welcome. Thank you for joining us and interrupting your fun-filled evening.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys taking the time to let me jump in. First of all, I heard you guys at the outset. I have been jumping in and out as a fan of the podcast, and
We
let me
like
tell you,
that.
What's that
you.
like?
I don't know.
Do we
And
suck as much as everyone says?
well, it's in these situations where people, especially with the last name LeBlue, end up being vindicated. But
Wait a minute, Andrew. Before we go any further, is that Garfield as your avatar?
we're doing this on the phone. I had to get creative.
Just had to acknowledge that. All right, go ahead.
but but yeah, I my 15-second analysis on this is, I mean, it essentially comes back to a thought process I had when it came to the Sam Seifkes hire, which is a lot of these guys are always playing high risk situations with a feel for what's best for them. Sam Seifkes is working for Jonathan Gannon, right? A guy who's in year 3 going in with the Cardinals. He's sitting there as the linebackers coach. And he says, what would I rather do? Go take a shot at being the Virginia Tech defensive coordinator and possibly prove myself? Or go down with the ship here in Arizona where it doesn't look like the situation is getting any better and I could be toast, right? I mean, if Gannon gets fired, so do I. He's more likely to look better at Virginia Tech than the situation miraculously works out with the Arizona Cardinals, right? And that's the NFL. It's a totally different level, but the situation remains the same. If you're Tyler Bowen, you've shown. It's going to be debatable amongst the fan base, but we'll call it a semblance of some promise. Your offenses statistically were okay. And would you rather go down with the ship at Virginia Tech potentially with William Pop Watson and coming off surgery, Chiron Drones, or reset with the experience at Ohio State as the offensive line coach? Because you know where you're not going to be unemployed after next year
Yep.
unless things go terribly wrong?
Yep.
That would be the Ohio State University. So this is a guy, and I missed some of the podcast, so I don't want to totally harp on and repeat things that you guys might have already said. But in a world where you can make more money doing a lesser job at a better school with higher potential that ultimately might be a better resume builder, and you could still say, I called plays at Virginia Tech, and here's what my offense did, but statistically wasn't that bad, and time heals all wounds, and in 5 years, no one's going to remember the ups and the downs. They'll just look at the numbers. Yeah, if I'm Tyler Bowen, I'm doing that.
Yeah, no brainer. 10 times out of 10. 10 times out of 10 you're
More
doing
money
it.
for less responsibility and more stability? Absolutely.
That's an American dream, baby.
Let's be realistic, guys. Let's be realistic. What are the odds that Tyler Bowen looks better after losing Ollie Jennings, Jalen Lane, Stephen Gosnell, Daquan Felton, the entire offensive line, and the like? Let's be honest with ourselves. The odds are low. Quit while you're ahead. That's what I would do in my job.
Yeah.
If you could
Yeah.
put some sort of automotive software sales metaphor to this that I'm not willing to conjure in my mind. So yeah, I mean, it's a hard pill to swallow if you're Virginia Tech, because at a certain point, right, you'd like to think that the calling the plays for the Hokies is worth more than a position coach job anywhere. But in 2025, I'm stealing this from one of our Twitter commenters. So shout out to you, Twitter commenter, and thank you for listening. There's the NFL, There's the Ohio States, the Oregons, the Texases, and the LSUs of the world. And then there's the level that we're playing at. And is that something that Virginia Tech's going to have to accept going forward? Probably. But at the same time, you can't look past the idea that this plays into the situation, because Tyler Bowen felt like he was in a situation to succeed. You stay and you go for, being the play caller at Wisconsin in the future, or, fill in the blank other school where you can be promoted from being the play caller at a Virginia Tech, which is still in the top 25 in NIL and still a name brand school. So this is more of an indictment on the situation than anything else. And if you guys disagree with me, I'd love to hear, but I have a feeling you probably don't.
Right on the money. You're right on the money.
Now, Mike made a comment earlier in the show that we disagreed a lot on the Cephas podcast, and tonight it's going to be a lot of nodding and agreement. There's really not much debate on this episode tonight, considering what's happened. I think we'll go ahead and get into some more of the candidates here. I did want to get to Fontel really quick before we move on to some external folks. Mike, it's let's say it's February 12th, which is a week from now, and Virginia Tech announces that Fontel Mines is your offensive coordinator. How you feeling about that?
I think that well, there would be a little bit of an appreciation for Pry betting on his guy, right? I think we could. He's continued to give him pay raises. He's continued to push him to the forefront of his staff, and this would be the biggest promotion to date, right? So on one hand, I would have an appreciation for that. I think that would be a continuity hire, right? In terms of the players know him, etc. I don't know how well that would work out. Like, I think there would be better candidates in terms of guys who have done it before. And I think with the uncertainty you have with Cephas in terms of he's never run a P4 defense, which is a point, Ricky, I know you and I disagreed on last week. But I think now it's even more important that you have an OC with experience, just because you are taking a shot on your defensive coordinator, right? I think you're in a position now where you almost have to hire experience, even if it's a journeyman at offensive coordinator, even if it's like a bridge coach for a year. You can't go into the year with two highly inexperienced guys at the college level. In terms of play calling, we've already seen how that's gone. And Bowen, again, statistically fine, and truthfully, Chris Marv's defense is statistically fine. It was the bend and break nature rather than bend and don't break. It was too many explosives they were giving up that were an absolute backbreaker and a killer. I would be okay with Mines. I would understand it from Pry's standpoint. I would understand it. An internal hire, I would understand. I don't think they're going to go internal unless it was Fontel Mines, Ricky, to your point. That's the only guy I could see being the offensive coordinator if you're going internal on the hire. The only guy. Yeah,
pretty much. Andrew, are you feeling a potential Fontel Mines promotion?
I mean, look, if you're Brent Pry, I don't think that you, Ricky, or Mike, or anyone listening to this podcast, because I know you're all highly educated, are unaware of this, that Brent Pry is behind the 8-ball.
Yes, that would be fair. That would be a fair statement. Yes, that would be fair.
You have to retain the talent that's on the team, and keeping a sense of continuity, especially in a guy that is a high-level recruiter and one of the better coaches, is going to help you do that. At the same time, you have an option now, and you have to do so with a quick turnaround, that an almost unprecedented level quick turnaround. I mean, like, it is the Super Bowl week. Your good players have gone and played in these East West Shrine, Senior Bowl, blah 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 type games. Like, spring camp starts in a few weeks, and you don't have a play caller. And without Tyler Bowen, let's be frank, Brett Pry as a defensive coach, you don't have an offense. And I'm not necessarily convinced that Fontel Mines is the heir apparent to whatever this offensive scheme, whatever you want to call it, that they were running over the course of the last 2 years was. So yeah, take a risk on a wide receivers coach from your rival school for the sake of keeping the talent that you have on the roster, or risk it heading into the second transfer portal period where in the era of NIL, yeah, maybe you had a couple of guys, the quarterback for one, signed contracts. And, and you know what those contracts are worth? You can ask the University of Wisconsin. They're not worth a damn. They are not worth a damn. So,
Yep.
so if you're Brent Pry, you are stuck somewhere between a rock and an extremely hard place. And you might be wishing that Ohio State defensive coordinator job opened up 1 year later, but you're going to play with the cards that you're dealt. If I was him, especially noting what you've done at defensive coordinator at this point, you probably lean towards experience.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess we'll get into it here in the next few minutes. But then the question becomes who's available, because if the twice bastardized son of failed coaching staffs 2 times over is the best option you got, and yeah, he's done it before, but with mixed results, maybe you take a risk. That's part of the argument for Seatkiss, right? Like, Jay Bateman's succeeded and failed, succeeded and failed. He's done it before. He's got over bajillion snaps of defense plays that he's called. Maybe you go for the, less experienced guy with the higher upside, and you bet on him insofar as you bet on yourself. Doing that twice seems like a move a crazy person would do. But if you're Brett Pry, you were leaning on continuity with Tyler Bowen, your good friend of yours who you took out of the, the clutches of the Urban Meyer Jacksonville Jaguar era. And, it's funny how it all comes full circle, because it goes from Ohio State to the Jaguars to Virginia Tech, and goddamn, does it go back from Virginia Tech to Ohio State. and I guess, what else does he have to coach before he checks all the boxes on the bingo card? Because he coached tight ends at Jacksonville, quarterbacks and offensive coordinator, and now he's doing the offensive line. So if maybe Penn State will pick up Tyler Bowen to do the running backs next year, then he can really say he had a full, well-rounded career and call it quits with all the money that he's making. But if you're Brett Pry, you're in an extremely tough spot, and it becomes a question of who's available. And I'll leave that to Mike McDaniel to tell me what the options are.
And I just real quick, Ricky, I don't mean to do this. I need to rant. I need to rant for a second. 30 seconds. No longer than 30 seconds. Okay.
Somebody time this fool. Go ahead.
No longer than 30 seconds. I promise. A lot of people on social media this afternoon and this evening tweeted out things like, "We don't need him. Good riddance. Glad he's gone. Couldn't coach offense out of a paper bag." Like, a lot of people were really happy to see Tyler Bowen go. I get that he's had a tumultuous tenure at Virginia Tech in terms of the fan bases always hate their offensive coordinator. And I get that there are some games that are out there, very mixed results. The Clemson game this year, the whole game plan was weird. There have been some things that are valid that you can point to and say Bowen didn't coach the best game here, didn't coach the best game there. these people are really happy to see him go, even though it's at this point of the cycle. My question for those people is, who are you hiring? Do you have a good answer for me? Who are you hiring here? If you don't have that answer, then I can only take what you're saying with a grain of salt. It's an emotional reaction. And a lot of the people, not all, but a lot of the people who have the reaction of good riddance Tyler Bowen are the people who think that this is still an attractive job that people want. I am sorry, Ricky. You know this. This is not an attractive job anymore. It's not. Maybe it would be with a new staff, new head coach. People would see value. People would see there's potential at Virginia Tech, much like Brent Pry did when he got the job here. This is a dead end job right now, flat out. It is a dead end job. I see a lot of people saying Neil Brown should be the next offensive coordinator. He just got out of a dead end job at West Virginia. Like, he was a lame duck. So now he's going to be the offensive coordinator of Virginia Tech for a year. He's better off sitting it out, going back to the G5 as a head coach. There is no upside for Neil Brown to take this coaching job. I would be more than happy to see that happen, right? Like, he can coach an offense. That would be fine. Maybe Virginia Tech brings in Neil Brown. I wouldn't count on it. People saying Joe Moorhead, that would be a miracle. Those are the same people that thought Jim Knowles was coming to Blacksburg. Guys, don't believe everything you hear. Don't believe everything you read. Don't believe everything you hear. Those are the same people thinking Jim Knowles thought this was an attractive job. I am telling you, Virginia Tech's going to have a hard time. I will come on this podcast and I will apologize if this ends up being a really, really good hire, a guy who's been around the block, a guy who's got good experience and has called a great offense like Joe Moorhead. If it's that kind of hire, I will tip my cap to Brent Pry. It will be one of the most impressive hires that he's made, given the circumstances and the timing and where he's at in his tenure. But until we see that name come across the desk, I am going to be extremely, extremely skeptical on who he's going to be able to hire here. This is going to be a really, 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 really tough call for Pry to make. Andrew said it, up against the 8-ball is putting it nicely. This is an impossible spot for him, in my opinion, man. This is just good luck. Good luck. That's all I can say about this. Good luck.
Pretty sure you blew past the 30, but we'll let it slide.
Yeah.
A couple of the names there have been a ton of names in the comments, and I want to run through them, but I also want to run through one I haven't seen yet that, like I was saying earlier, my buddy Stephen Newman told me about. So you mentioned Joe Moorhead, Ricky Ronnie from ODU, and Neil Brown. So the Moorhead one is interesting. Obviously, there's the Penn State connection there.
Mm-hmm.
Moorhead's at Akron. Akron sucks.
Terrible job.
He's in the MAC. He's in the MAC. He's not winning. I'm not familiar with his contract status. But if Moorhead were looking for a way out of that job where he could potentially work himself into, maybe, I'm trying to figure out which one of these that Andrew is actually in. Maybe he's on this one. If you're Moorhead and you're trying to get out of Akron, maybe you leave, you take this job, you maybe work wonders for a year, maybe you help save Brent Pry's job, and then you're able to parlay that into a bigger role at another program moving forward. I don't think this is likely. I don't think it makes a ton of sense for Moorhead to leave. However, if he's trying to, this is probably the best shot he's going to have.
Yeah.
The Ronnie name is interesting. Similar situation. He's at ODU. ODU is in a better conference, I believe, in the Sun Belt. He's winning a bit more than Joe Moorhead is at Akron. Ronnie has obviously got the connection with Pry at Penn State. Again, not familiar with Ricky Ronnie's contract status. However, as someone that, again, could potentially be looking for a lifeboat, depending on how things are looking over there, well, over here in Norfolk, Ronnie could be a potential name that I think would excite some folks, Mike.
Speaking of Norfolk, I would like to warn all the bars in that area for the weekend of Ricky's wedding. Me and Mike are coming to town.
It's like Santa Claus,
now, Ricky, I just want to throw this out real quick. So Mike's wife will not be coming. I did say, Mike, you still have a +1. We could bring producer Scott in that role. So I don't know. We could work this out offline, but that I'm just saying. Uh, in terms of what we're talking about with potential offensive coordinator hires, though, uh, it's going to take it, for if there's going to be a name that isn't going to make people on the World Wide Web, which unfortunately the three of us are way too well connected to, but it is what it is, have some sort of positive reaction. It's going to take a friend or someone just like overtly willing, not caring about money to try to revive their career. Like a Neil Brown would be that situation, right? If Neil Brown says, screw it, I got the short end of the stick. I'm making this money either way. Let me coach Virginia Tech with a bunch of unproven wide receivers, a bad offensive line, and a quarterback again coming off injury, or Pop Watson. If Neil Brown wants to do that, well, God bless you, sir, and God bless us, everyone. But then I just have a hard time imagining that. You bring out Moorhead, same situation.
Yeah.
It's going to be, in all likelihood, if I had to bet my hard-earned money on it, an upstart. And it's going to be learning on the fly. And the question that I ask is, are they going to be running the Tyler Bowen offense? And to some of you listeners out there, I know what you're thinking right now. What is the Tyler Bowen offense? Because it changes after 3 games every season. Fuck, neither do I. I don't know either. But I think that Pete B pointed out on Twitter a very excellent point, which is like, you all are acting like this is a huge loss now, when in the past, like the very recent past, like a few months ago, you were calling for his head. And that's the question. And whether this is one of my favorite terms in the world of sports, addition by subtraction, remains to be seen. What kills me again, just like it did with the defensive coordinator hire, is the situation surrounding the time frame.
The timing, man. Timing's everything on this. If you fire him at the end of the year, I feel totally different about this. It's like, all right, yeah, you can go for an upgrade. The discussion is totally different.
Because Mike, let's be honest. If they had fired Tyler Bowen in the month of November, we would have all gone to a fireworks show in Ricky LeBlue's backyard. But instead, here we are in, on Super Bowl week, when there's no viable candidates and people are deep into their recruiting, and Virginia Tech's done their transfer portal recruiting. And you know who did a lot of that? Tyler Bowen.
Yep.
Yep. And so in the modern age of college football, there is a deep worry surrounding retention. There is a deep worry surrounding continuity. And the one thing this team had going for it was that word I just said, and that was continuity, right? And it was like, you have the same offense with the same offensive coordinator, or the same quarterback's coach, and maybe the quarterback was hurt. And despite everything you lost, there's going to be that sense there, and you don't have it. So you can either grasp at straws trying to recreate it, or you can go for the Hail Mary. And again, if you're Brett Pry, you're putting 70% of your paycheck in your savings account, knowing that there's a high chance that you're unemployed 12 months from now. And it's a tough reality that he's going to have to face. And if I was Brett Pry, I'd feel like I was stabbed in the back by Tyler Bowen, a friend who I hired out of the abyss. But that's his life. And I'll put this on the record right now. I don't blame Tyler Bowen for a second for what he did.
Nope.
Because that's life. It's the guy's job. We'd fire again. If Ricky LeBlue was the athletic director, we'd have fired him in November.
I was the athletic director. I don't know that he's getting the job in the first place, but that's a different story. But no, I think we're all in agreement that Bowen probably made the best decision for him and his family. Some more names that I'm seeing here in the comment section. Low Country Living, which it's not allowing me to show here it is. Jake Peets, which I had never heard of before, kind of similar to Sam Siefkis, which I find is an odd comparison, but fitting considering we just hired someone that no one had ever heard of before. Guy's been do a ton of different jobs, mostly in the NFL. Has been an analyst at Bama. Was the OC and quarterbacks coach at LSU for a year.
Post Joe Brady, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and then has been the pass game coordinator this past year for the Seattle Seahawks. If you're looking for a Sam Siefkis template, that's probably the closest you're going to find.
Yeah.
Some other names. The East Carolina offensive coordinator, another guy I'd never heard of before. I'll be honest right now, this guy's not leaving East Carolina for this job. Christian Taylor, who is a current Bills analyst and used to coach at William & Mary as the offensive coordinator. Not sure he's leaving Sean McDermott for this job. What else we got here? Joe Craddock from Tulane, another name I'd never heard of. Looks like he was the OC for 2 years under John Sumrall at Troy and is the OC at Tulane under Sumrall.
Don't see that only because he could follow Sumrall to an SEC job in a year, or he could become Tulane's head coach. So
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The Neil Brown stuff, we've talked about this from Hokie Fanatic. Again, the only reason he's going to take this job is if he's pissed off and he's bored and he wants something to do.
Yeah.
That big ass buyout he's got is going to keep him from taking a lot of jobs.
Yep.
Here's another name that we didn't consider for the internal one, Brent Davis, former OC at Army, running the option stuff. I don't see this happening. But if
don't have the personnel,
I guess. So let's get to some names that I have.
Brent Davis is that way. Before we move past Brent Davis, he is on staff.
Yes.
So, I mean, if you're going for the continuity play,
an option.
Like, all right. Quickly before we go into Ricky's list, who is the Vegas odds favorite? Mine. Who's after that? Brent Davis. If Vegas was allowing you to gamble on this, it would be Mines and then Brent Davis and then the field. The field, I'm sure, would be the best option. But if we're looking at individual names, I think that we can't look past Brent Davis, just like we couldn't look past Sean Quinn before. And obviously that didn't happen.
God. Yeah.
But nonetheless, like, you know, are we going to have to look for some scrappy upstart, you know, Sean McVay wannabe from the, you know, laundry room of the Philadelphia Eagles? Perhaps.
Yeah, perhaps. So the name I want to bring up, and Andrew, maybe this is your second leader on the odds chart. This is a name that was floated to me again by Stephen Newman. So I want to make sure I give him credit for this. Josh Gaddis.
No, thank you.
So
could see it though. Could see it.
For those who are not familiar with Josh Gaddis, Josh coached at Penn State for 3 years. Ended up at Alabama under Nick Saban. Spent a couple years at Michigan as the offensive coordinator. Was the offensive coordinator at Miami and then Maryland. He is I believe he's a Broyles winner. Yep.
At Michigan.
Broyles winner at Michigan. He has been fired from his last two jobs, which is something to consider here. He was fired.
Ricky, I would call Miami and Maryland like the lonely road to failure.
Well,
I'd call Virginia Tech that. Yeah. We can add another notch to that belt.
So you have a coach here that has legitimate play calling experience. He's done it a ton at the college level. You have someone that Brent Pry is extremely familiar with from his days at Penn State, someone who was regarded as a pretty solid recruiter, especially at Bama and Michigan. Guys, I don't love it either, but given the situation that we're in, I'm not sure that there would be a better option available. And he is available.
Yep. I agree. I mean, I agree. It wouldn't be my first choice, but like, I'm not sure you're getting your first choice given the period in the hiring cycle. So,
Mike, are you saying you're not getting your first choice in February in the ACC in 2025? No, come on. I figure we're going to hire Cliff Kingsbury away from the Commanders. But no, I mean, it is what it is. You know, you could hire an Eric Bieniemy, a Josh Gaddis, a big name with a lot of experience that's available. There's a lot of names that, you know, more people on this who are listening to this podcast and on this podcast, because I don't think any of us would claim to be headhunters in the offensive coordinator market. We didn't expect to even have to be until about midway through the afternoon today.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
it's a question of how Brent Pry wants to approach this. When it came to defensive coordinator, he said, high potential, swing for the fences. Is he willing to do that again? Or will he go for some semblance of experience and stability? I mean, how freaking ironic would it be if after all of this that we went through, that next year we go into the season with two coordinators who have never called the play at the Power 5 FBS level, or even the FBS level in general? Because there is a very real path, a very real road that's the direction that we're going. After Whit Babcock, Brent Pry come out publicly and say what we're looking for is experience. So do you save face? Because the reality is in February, there's just not all that many quality candidates left to hire. And if you're Virginia Tech, from an economic perspective, like, to steal someone away at this point is going to cost you a lot of money.
Yep.
And that's a check that the athletic director is going to have to sign. If someone's willing, I'm sure he might be willing too, because as we've talked about multiple times on this program, the fate of Mr. Pry and Mr. Babcock might as well be zip tied to each other.
Yep.
But I mean, again, the rock and the hard place, you know, metaphor, whatever you want to call it, is hard to ignore. And me as a person, as a guy who has always liked Brent Pry personally, I've met him a number of times. He's always been good to me. And someone who I've always felt, you can go back to the original podcast where I'm sure I spoke very highly of him. And there's probably many podcasts of the hundreds that we've recorded where I spoke highly of him. The exact personality that I would want to represent this program. And I think he's done a good job in terms of healing some of the issues that we had in terms of recruiting. But at the end of the day, like, he might just be screwed. He's going to have to hit a home run here. At least with Tyler Bowen, it was the devil that you knew. And Cephas was going to be the high ceiling, low floor devil that you didn't. And to do that on two ends in a sport where you're as strong as your weakest link is just a scary prospect. It's a scary prospect. And, you know, it's just not unimaginable to see that house go on the market for the third time in 5 years.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're not wrong. Interesting thought here from Andrew, not Andrew Alix, but Andrew in the comments. Wouldn't be surprised with a Mines Davis co-OC and drop some money on a new QB coach. that is something to consider, that if Virginia Tech were to hire whoever they end up hiring for this position, they're going to have to find out who their quarterback's coach is. And Fontel Mines, Elijah Brooks, not going to be those guys. So you're going to have to find a way to fill that spot if you end up going internally. And if you go externally, it probably makes the most sense to hire someone that has some quarterback experience. One more name I wanted to throw out there, which I don't think this is at all likely, but I think it's an interesting thought. Virginia Tech flirted a lot with Anthony Poindexter for the defensive coordinator position. That obviously did not work out.
Oh, okay, I thought you were going to have him beat the OC. Yeah.
No.
Continue.
Might as well.
However, same staff, Jawan Sider or Cedar, however you pronounce his last name.
I think it's Cider. I might be wrong.
He's just finished his 7th year at Penn State. He is an assistant head coach, which is something to consider. He is technically a co-offensive coordinator, but we know who's calling the plays there at Penn State. It's not him. He's, apparently considered somewhat of a coach in waiting potentially when Franklin decides to hang it up, which I don't think is anytime soon. Franklin's
Is he like in his early 50s?
Yeah, I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon. However, Sider is really well regarded at Penn State. He was a very good recruiter. He recruited a lot against Virginia Tech in the Fuente era. If you're Brent Pry, do you make that phone call and try and sway him from Penn State? And do you have any shot of making that happen?
Money.
I mean, if you're Brent Pry, all options are on the table right now.
You gotta swing. You just gotta swing and hope you make contact. Like, you just gotta take some swings and hope you make contact. Yeah, you gotta nail it. And I just don't know who it's gonna be, but you gotta nail it. And you gotta nail it. And it's gonna probably end up being somebody who is a little off the radar that we're gonna look at.
I was gonna say it's probably someone we haven't mentioned tonight.
Yeah, we're gonna have a podcast and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about the pros and cons of it. But I think, Ricky and I disagreed on the Cephas hire like a week ago. And the one key difference between the Cephas hire and this one is the Cephas hire, you fired the guy to get into that coaching search, and you had 7 weeks to hire the next guy. And that was your choice to make. This one, it's kind of like, well, you're left holding the bag, and now you got to figure out what to do. And those are two totally different situations to be in. You fired a guy, you're handpicking the next one, versus you had a coordinator leave unexpectedly, and now you're scrambling at a bad time in the cycle. So I will not be, I can tell you right now, considering the circumstances, I was good with the Cephas hire. But no matter what happens with the OC hire, it's going to be really hard to be critical of whoever Brent Pry chooses outside of just the fact that it didn't have to come to this, right? You didn't have to be this bad of a program the last few years to put yourself in this position. But outside of that conversation, it's going to be really hard to actually criticize the hire itself, just because it could literally be anybody, and it's just a really tough spot for him to be in. I think the pool, it could be anybody. You got to take some swings, but I think the pool is very narrow in terms of guys who are actually interested in this and guys who can actually go out and hire. So that's my last thought on that.
And again, I don't want to harp on this too much, because it's a business and we stand on business on the Hokie Hangover podcast, despite the fact that we are a podcast of peace, love, and understanding. But
Jesus.
The Marv fire, as Mike mentioned before, and I'm not.
Oh, we might have lost
Oh
him.
no! Oh no!
He's about to jump into a grand monologue, and we might have lost him. Before we wrap this up, Mike, since it sounds like it's just you and I at the moment, you mentioned that the defensive coordinator search took 7 weeks. Virginia Tech doesn't have 7 weeks, obviously.
They do not. Yeah, they do not.
In this situation. Practices are going to be starting soon. Do you think that we get a coordinator by the time practices start? Do you think that we have that?
Yeah, I do.
Do you think we
I
have it
do.
within 2 weeks?
I think
Because I
maybe
feel
not.
like at a certain point you have to have the coordinator and the play caller in position with a cushion between that and the start of practice,
Yeah.
because you're going to start doing installs,
Yeah.
and
It's got to be in place.
yeah, and you're going to have time to build out that playbook, and that can't be done in 48 hours. So
And you're just flat out, in my opinion, and maybe I'm going to be completely wrong about this, but you're flat out just like not going to talk to as many people about this job just by nature of when it's taking place. I don't think you're going to be talking to as many potential options, right? I just think it's a different situation. This is the identifying the candidate pool, number one, at the front of every coaching search, right, is key. But then number two, it's like who's actually interested, who's gettable here. This could be, you know what this could be, Ricky, that I haven't said specifically tonight. I just want to mention this real quick before we wrap up. We got to look at the group of five here.
yeah,
We got to look at the group of five. OCs at the G5, head coaches who might be in a lame duck situation, the G5. That's and you know, this broke this afternoon and we were working and all that stuff. Like, we haven't had enough time. But like, that's what I want to dive into a little bit and hope I can come up with some names and some thoughts around that before we actually make a hire. Right? That's what I want to do some research into that a little bit more. But I that would not be when I say off the radar, that's what I'm thinking. Like a guy from a lower level of the FBS potentially making a jump up that would be interested in getting that on a resume.
yeah. If they're able to find a group of 5 coordinator that has play calling experience to take this job, I'm not sure that I'm not sure you can find anything better at this point for that. I think having the play calling experience is got to be one of the points of emphasis in this job search. Mike, you mentioned that you're having a head coach who's still learning on the job. You've got a defensive coordinator that is going to be absolutely learning on the job, especially at the college level. And as a play caller, you really can't afford to have your top 3 guys on the staff still trying to figure this thing out. So having somebody, even if it is someone who's a bit of a retread like Josh Gaddis, if you have someone that's done this before, can provide some stability, someone who's confident in the job, understands how to do it.
Team friendly buyout. That way he can be a bridge coach if you need him to be.
Yeah. You know, and crazy part is this could be the last hire that Brent Pry makes. So
yeah, it's on the table.
Hopefully it's a good one.
It's on the table.
Andrew has rejoined us. Andrew, I'm not sure if you can hear us or not. I know you're on mute right now, but any last thoughts before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know if I was like cutting out or something, or if it was just a bad situation.
It just
you
stopped.
did cut out. It just stopped. It stopped flat out. Just like phone dropped, stopped. Like you were midway through a sentence, and that was it. So
well, basically, the long story short point I was trying to make there was, and Mike, you can edit that out for the audio version of this, but yeah, like Brent Pry saved Tyler Bowen's job when big media heads like Ricky LeBlue were calling for it, and he stabbed him in the back, which sucks for him. So tough day, but you thought you had to. I thought the potential last hire that Brent Pry was going to have to make was Cephas. And
yeah,
and now you got to roll the dice not once but twice. And I don't know if a lot of our listeners play dice games, but the odds of getting the what you want on 2 rolls of the dice, not just one, happen to be even lower. So
Yep.
there's going to have to be a certain level of calculation there. And if it is someone in February in college football, if you're Virginia Tech,
let's be honest with where we're at right now. There's no such thing as a perfect hire. So you're either going to be taking some level of damaged goods, i.e., your Gannis's of the world, or you're going to be shooting for the moon in a world where landing amongst the stars just isn't quite good enough. And that's the hand that you're dealt if you're Brett Pry. So in the 2025 world of college football, where you're thinking about roster retention and a guy like Fontel Lyons has his upsides, but also knowing that we've seen this movie before and you can't afford to have someone learn on the job. All I can say as a commentator on the scenario to Brent Pry, a guy who, as I've mentioned before, I really like, is I'm sorry. And I hope you can figure it out. And I hope you can figure it out fast because despite what Puxatawny Phil said, spring is just around the corner. And with a team full of young wide receivers, a very fresh offensive line, a quarterback coming off injury, and a room of running backs who collectively have all seen 50 states, you have to bring something together that can beat, uh, beating Cal isn't going to be enough, right? You're going to have to pick up some wins against some other programs there. And I truly, from a managerial perspective, wouldn't wish this upon my worst enemy. But it's, welcome to being a Virginia Tech football fan in the third decade of the 21st century. And I wish it didn't have to be like this. And I also, I will say for the record, told a friend of mine, I told her, I said, well, the podcast thing is ramping down. It looks like all the news has happened. I struggle to think of things that we can report on, and the content gods will just simply never let that be the case.
Amen to that.
Yep.
Angie, you mentioned you wouldn't wish that on your worst enemy. I bet Tony Elliott's pretty happy right now.
Tony
yeah.
Elliott is the luckiest head football coach in the state of Virginia. And I had dinner tonight, a very nice dinner, with one of Ricky Ronnie's former assistants. Said a great guy. But yeah, and again, sinking ship. And he didn't even leave for another program. He left for software sales.
That's one way to do it.
Yeah, you might be working with Brent Pry soon. I'm not talking about on a football staff.
Oh, man.
I would say I won't call this guy out by name, though he was the former Walter Payton Award winner in 2023. He
Easy Google. Thank you very much.
Again, football coaching isn't for the faint of heart, and for a very good reason. But I'd hire him. He's available for a price. We could beat his software sales.
Anyone's
salary,
available for
probably.
a price. Hell, the way I've been playing on college football 25, maybe I can do the job.
Yep.
Last couple things.
It's an option, Ricky. It's an option.
Last thing before we wrap this up, Hokie Law Dog asked for any chance of other departures. I would be surprised given the time. I think this coaching staff is pretty set. I also thought that 48 hours ago. So never say never, right? But given that there's really not many other changes going on at the college football level as far as coaches go, I think we're done. Last suggestion for OC. Basketball is tied with SMU, Mike Young. I would like to note, Hokie Crazy, since you sent this to us, Virginia Tech is now down 5. So this is your fault.
Young would have more NIL to work with.
There it is.
Jesus Christ.
That was easy.
To your point there, Ricky, Hokie Law Dog, remember the Alamo. You forgot the SATX part. I assume that's what we're abbreviating for there.
So Hokie Nation truly is nationwide. But departures, staff-wise, I doubt it. They might all be getting a raise. But personnel-wise is what I'm more worried about. Because, again, even in an NIL world, people are still committing to coaches rather than programs. And I would take a look at both the starting and backup quarterback position, where, what seems like a long 2 months ago at this point, but in the grand scheme of things, not that long. Both guys seemed rather fickle. That would be a possibility. I'm not wish casting that. I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying to keep an eye on that. And even positions like wide receiver and stuff like that, where there might have been some sort of relationship with the man calling the plays. But yeah, again, not a podcast that any of the three of us expected to have tonight, but here we are.
We'll be back at some point. I mean,
Probably pretty soon.
Well, Mike, to be fair, it could be 6 to 8 weeks before they hire.
Yeah,
That's true.
I mean,
Yeah, that's okay. All right, fair enough. All right, fair enough.
I was gonna say that I think there's a possibility we might end up waiting a little bit, but no, you're probably right. This should be a shorter turnaround, but we'll see what happens.
Should be. Nothing surprises
rate,
me.
review,
We've
subscribe.
seen the clock management with the staff now. Come on.
Oh boy,
Come on.
Jesus.
Come on.
Zing.
Empty the clip, Mike. Make sure you, if you're in Blacksburg, Counts Family Pharmacy, that's the place you want to go. Always appreciative of them for supporting the show. Home Field Apparel, probably the best place to get tech gear, right, Mike? If you're looking for tech gear in the off season, Home Field's going to be the place to go. We'll be back again, like we said. If you're listening on YouTube, make sure you tap the bell along with subscribing so you get the notifications when we go live. Until then, go Hokies.